Hey, welcome back to True Crime with Lux. Sorry, I just kind of disappeared there. The holidays were a lot more than I expected when it came to recording, so there was a couple weeks that I took off. I am back today with a new case. We're going to be talking about Christina Kettlewell. Christina Cecilia Moken was born on August 7th, 1925 in Toronto, Ontario. Her parents, Casimir and Mary, had 3 girls. They had a normal childhood, and Christina was described as a very likable girl. She graduated high school in 1943 and went to work as a bank teller. She met 23-year-old Ronald Berry. He was a professional ballroom dancer, and he lived in the same neighborhood as her parents. They soon became close friends, but nothing romantic ever happened between them. Christina was actually interested in his roommate, Jack Kettlewell. He had just enlisted in the Canadian Armed Forces, and they started dating. When he was overseas, Ronald would look out for Christina. July of 1946, Jack was stationed overseas, so Christina asked Ronald if she could borrow some money to buy something, but she wouldn't really give him any details as to what it is she needed money for. He trusted her, so he ended up giving her $2,000. Now, I don't know you, but I don't have a lot of good friends that would give me that kind of money. So, I understand he was really looking out for her with her boyfriend being overseas, but that's a lot to just give to somebody, especially not knowing what it is they need it for. But he gave her the money with the understanding between the two of them that she would pay him back. After a month of not being paid anything, not even like payments of any sort, he asked her about it, like, am I ever going to get my money back? Like, what's going on? She said someone was making it hard for her due to an incident that had happened a while back. Concerned, Ronald asked her what she was talking about, and she said back in April she went to a church dance, and afterwards 5 men had attacked her, and were now blackmailing her for money. Ronald asked questions, and he wanted to know why she hadn't gone to the police or even had told her father. Christina said that she'd kill herself before she would ever let her father know what happened. Ronald was really worried at that statement, and he really didn't want her to hurt herself, so he kept her secret and continued to give her money. It ended up racking up to $12,000. He believed what happened to her, but he thought that there was more to the story. He didn't want to push her for more information, though, and even kept the secret from Jack. April of 1947, a year later, Christina went to the apartment that Ronald and Jack shared and asked Ronald if he would come with her to talk in private. She handed him $10,000 in cash. He asked where she had got the money, but she avoided really answering the question, and then she finally caved and said the people who were blackmailing her agreed to actually help her pay him back. He didn't really believe her, and when he asked for further details, she started just crying, so he kind of just dropped the subject. He asked her if she could just deposit the money into his account since she worked at the bank and was headed there anyway, and she said, yeah, of course. It would later be said after she died that Christina's behavior was that of someone who tended to throw tantrums. If she didn't get her way or if it looked like she was being questioned too much, she would just kind of start crying and change the subject. Now, Ronald wasn't the only one who saw this. It's believed that a part of this was due to her insecurities about her relationship with Jack. She felt like he was going to leave her. Now, the day after she gave Ronald money, she went back to the apartment in the morning with eggs. She said that she had taken the day off of work and if it was okay if she just kind of hung out with them at the apartment. Ronald left to run some errands and he came back for lunch, then went out again for about an hour, and when he got back, he found Christina and Jack unconscious. He said he didn't know what happened, so he tried to wake them up for hours. They were breathing, he could tell, but they weren't waking up. He found an envelope with his name on it sitting on the table, and he recognized Christina's handwriting. Inside this envelope was a letter explaining that she had killed Jack and herself because if he didn't want to marry her, then she didn't want to live without him, and she didn't want him to live on to marry someone else. Now, Ronald does a lot of weird things after he finds this letter. He actually hid the letter so no one would find out, and he watched over them and continued to try and wake them. He spent all night moving their bodies so they wouldn't be in one position for too long. That's a lot of effort when you could literally just call the police or an ambulance, get some sort of help, but he never did. In the morning, after they still hadn't woken up, he called the pharmacy for advice. One pharmacist told him to give them some warm water with mustard to induce vomiting, and another one he hung up on because he said they were asking too many questions. He did end up doing the mustard and water thing, and Christina did throw up, but she didn't actually wake up afterwards. Jack and Christina finally woke up around noon, but they were sick and out of it. Ronald said that there were times that the phone rang or someone would come by the apartment, but he ignored it all so he didn't have to explain what was happening. When Jack was finally aware enough to understand what was happening, he was worried that Christina's parents were looking for her since she hadn't been home in almost 2 days at this point. Ronald said Jack told him that they should send a telegram saying that Jack and Christina had gotten married so nobody would really worry about her. Now, that would probably not even be an option that crosses my mind. If you need to make up some kind of alibi for somebody being away is to say, oh, we just got married. It's very weird and very out there, but I guess it's an option for them. He said he just wanted to buy time for Christina to be more aware because she was still groggy from everything. But when she was good again, she loved the idea of telling everyone that they had gotten married. She told Ronald to call her sister and tell her that she and Jack had gone to his cottage. Ronald felt the telegram was enough, but not wanting to risk upsetting Christina and her do something to harm herself again, he made the call to her sister. The next day, it took a full day for them to realize maybe that wasn't the best excuse to come up with, because now they had caused bigger problems by telling her family that they had just run off and gotten married. It wasn't that Jack didn't want to get married, he just wasn't planning on marrying anytime soon. He also wasn't too sure that he wanted to marry Christina, but now he felt trapped, like he had to go through with it since this idea just kind of vomited out of his mouth. After Jack and Christina seemed to have recovered, Ronald felt like he could finally leave the apartment. So he went out and ran some errands, and before he left, Christina asked where he was going, and he said that he was going to swing by the bank. She started bawling her eyes out, and when he asked her why she was so upset he was going to the bank, she told him that she actually never deposited that money that he had asked her to do. He would later say that he was just stunned by all of this. He trusted her and did everything he could to help her, and she had lied and stolen all of his money. When he asked her why, she just cried and begged him not to tell anyone. He dropped the subject when Jack walked into the room. Jack still didn't know anything about the money Ronald had been lending Christina. But Ronald really wanted answers, but he was afraid to push Christina due to fear she'd hurt herself or somebody else. He decided to wait until the right moment to question her about what was going on. May 3rd, 1947. Things seemed to have calmed down and were getting better. That afternoon, Jack and Ronald decided to go to Ronald's cottage for the weekend, just kind of have a guy's weekend. Jack and Christina were going to get their marriage license real quick before they left. However, the office was closed by the time they got there, so they decided to wait until Monday to get their license. Due to this, Christina was now going to go with them to the cottage, because without that marriage license, she didn't want to go home without any proof that she was married. They ended up spending 4 days there, and everything was fine. Nothing of note happened. Jack told Ronald that even though he wasn't planning on getting married, he was willing to give it a try and see what happens. Christina was so excited, though, and she was just finally getting what she wanted. She wanted to marry Jack, and all of her actions led to her getting what she wanted. When they got back on May 7th, she started making plans for the wedding. She asked Ronald if he would go talk to the priest and explain their situation, and he did, and when he came back, he told them that the priest wanted to see them immediately. Ronald tried a few times to talk to Christina about the money, but They would either be interrupted or she would just cry and not really explain anything to him. On May 11th, Ronald had had enough, and he wanted answers. It was a large chunk of his money just gone, and he needed to know why. Christina said that she had given the money to the men that were blackmailing her. He asked her why, but she never gave a straightforward answer, and she spent the rest of the day sulking. The next morning, Christina left without saying anything to any of them. Ronald yelled out the window when he saw her and asked where she was going, but she just kept walking and said that she'd be back soon. Several hours later, they got worried because Christina still hadn't come back. They found out from their landlady that over the weekend she had lent a large amount of money to Christina so that she could go visit her boyfriend in another town. When Christina finally came back, she told them that she had gone to see her parents to tell them about the marriage. She said that it went okay, but as she explained it, she said her family wasn't happy about her behavior. Her parents didn't mind their relationship, but they didn't want her to marry him because they had different religions. They also found it a bit strange that Jack and Ronald lived together, and that Ronald had gone with them on their supposed honeymoon. That night, the three of them had some friends over for dinner, and during the dinner, Christina's two sisters showed up at the apartment unannounced. They were mad when they came in. Ronald tried to talk to them to find out what they were so mad about, but they didn't answer him. They just kept yelling about giving Christina opium and forcing her to marry Jack. Everyone was very confused, so Ronald asked Christina, do you even want to be with Jack or not? Because he didn't understand why her sisters had these notions that she was drugged and being forced into marrying Jack. Jack was also confused as to what the hell was going on. Christina's sister Helen said that she seemed very nervous when she said that she married Jack, which made them feel like something wasn't right, and they wanted to make sure that she was okay. They had called a cab for her sisters to leave, but they just kept crying, saying that Christina was being kidnapped and forced to be with Jack. None of this made sense to anyone since it was obvious Jack wasn't kidnapping Christina. She was there of her own free will and could obviously leave anytime she wanted to. They all left the apartment, and the sisters kept accusing Jack and Ronald of drugging and manipulating their sister. Helen soon realized that they weren't getting anywhere talking to them, so she went to the police station to get their help. However, they told her Christina was an adult, so there wasn't anything they could really do about it. Her other sister, Sophie, continued to cry, and she tried to get Christina to leave with her. It finally got to a point that Ronald called the police himself because Sophie was hysterical. Now, understand that all of this information comes from Ronald and Helen that night, the statements they gave to police after Christina later died. It seemed the events of that night started when Christina had visited her parents and she told them a lie about what had happened the night that she had tried to take her own life. She made it sound to them like she had been drugged by Ronald and Jack, when in reality, she had been the one to drug herself and Jack. After Ronald explained everything to the police, he returned to the apartment where Jack and Christina were waiting. They told him that they didn't want to wait any longer to get married and risk her family interfering anymore. They wanted to get married that night. Ronald said okay and asked what he could do to help them. And they told him just call the priest, so he did. And the priest agreed to marry them that night. They went to the house of the priest, and in that living room that night, Jack and Christina were married in front of a few close friends. Ronald's story of what happened next was that they all agreed that they would go with them to the cabin for their honeymoon. So the three of them again would go on vacation to this cottage. Because they had a lot of luggage to take with them was the excuse they used, which doesn't make sense. On May 16th, the three of them drove over to the cabin. The first few days went good, with nothing crazy happening. Then on Sunday, May 18th, Ronald went into the kitchen and he found Christina crying. He asked her what was wrong, and she said that she didn't know if Jack had married her because he loved her or if it was because of the attempted murder-suicide. Ronald reassured her that Jack did love her, and she seemed to feel better. A few times that day, though, she did seem lost in her thoughts, which concerned Ronald that she might be thinking of hurting herself again. The next morning, Ronald went out for a long walk to give them some time alone. When he got back, he saw Jack sleeping on the couch and Christina was writing a letter at the kitchen table. He tried to talk to them, but Jack never woke up and Christina ignored him, so he kind of just made Jack more comfortable on the couch before he left. He told Christina he was going to go lay outside for a few hours and then he'd come back in. When he came back a few hours later, they both hadn't moved. Jack still seemed to be asleep on the couch and Christina was sitting at the kitchen table. However, now the pillow under Jack's head was covered in blood. Thinking Jack might have gotten a nosebleed, he went to check on him and noticed that the blood was coming from his head. He frantically started looking for where this blood had come from and asked Christina what happened, but she just looked at him and didn't say anything. He then could smell the coal oil in the house, so he carried Jack outside to get some fresh air. He laid Jack down outside, and when he went to go back to get Christina, he saw smoke coming from the door in the kitchen. He ran inside to get her, but by that time, the smoke was too thick for him to see. He was yelling for her, but she never responded, so he thought maybe she had already run out of the house. He went back outside and grabbed what he could on the way out. Some small things in one of their suitcases that happened to be sitting by the door. He made it back to where he had put Jack and saw that the entire cabin was in flames now. He pulled Jack farther away from the fire and then started looking for Christina. He searched for 30 minutes, but he couldn't find her. He was finally able to flag down a boat on the lake and explain that they needed help. One of the men on the boat said that he would stay and continue looking for Christina while the other man took Jack and Ronald to the hospital. After Ronald got Jack all checked into the hospital, he went to the police to explain what happened, and they informed him that they found Christina's body on the shore of the river near the cabin. So she was able to get out, but she died. She was found face down in a puddle of water, wearing her pajamas from the night before. She didn't have any burns or signs of being in the smoke, so they hadn't determined a cause of death yet. When Jack woke up in the hospital, he said he couldn't remember anything that had happened. Police opened an investigation into what happened to Christina. An autopsy was performed, and it was noted that she didn't have any smoke in her lungs, and her cause of death was found to be from drowning. They sent for tests to see if there were any drugs in her system, and it came back that she had codeine in her stomach. The police believed that it was foul play, and as they investigated, they became more suspicious of Ronald. They asked him about all of the money that Christina had stolen from him, and asked about his cottage and the insurance that he had on it because Ronald had told them that with all of the money he had lost to Christina, he had become a little embarrassed about his finances. He was struggling to pay his bills, so police found it possible that he had burned down his cabin for the insurance. Ronald told them no because he didn't burn down his cabin and hadn't even thought of the insurance money. He said that they had planned to stay at the cabin all summer long and losing it was almost like losing a person. That was his place. Police found his story a bit hard to believe. However, a few days later, they made an announcement that they had ruled him out as a suspect and that there was no foul play in Christina's death. But they were going to keep the case open. Ronald told reporters that there was no foul play and he agreed with everything that the police had said. That was his last interview with reporters. Reporters then tried to reach out to his brother, who said Ronald had always been a private person, and also told them that Jack and Ronald had always been close since they met so close that when they worked together at a box factory, when one of them got fired, the other one just quit. Police would tell reporters that Jack was never a suspect and is not being investigated for the crime. Once Jack was finally released, he still hadn't talked to reporters and had only given his statement to police that he couldn't remember anything until he woke up in the hospital. Investigators searched through the debris at the cabin and they found a jar of coal oil that Ronald said he had brought to clean the pots and pans. They also found a 5-gallon jug that was used to power the generator, but there was nothing else there that explained how the fire started or what happened to Christina. The only theory they were left with was Christina had taken her own life after setting the cabin on fire. The only evidence they had was from the suitcase Ronald was able to grab on the way out. Inside, they found the letter Christina was writing that morning. It was a suicide note addressed to Ronald. It said that she didn't believe Jack really wanted to be married to her, that he only married her to prevent her from harming herself. She then wrote, "This is the best option because I can't bear for him to be with another woman." Ronald ended up giving both letters to the investigators, which matched his story of the events leading up to Christina's death. A coroner's inquest was ordered to look more into how Christina had drowned. People were more concerned with knowing Ronald's involvement in everything. Christina's sister Helen believed Jack and Ronald were involved in her sister's death. The inquest started on June 19th of 1947. Multiple medical professionals testified. One doctor said Jack was in shock at the hospital, and no one could figure out how he got his head wound or what caused it. Helen also testified and said Christina was a happy person before she met Jack and Ronald. She never had depression prior to meeting them and said her sister was never assaulted or blackmailed. She said she would have known if her sister had taken $15,000 from Ronald. So she believed that they were lying. She said the real problem her family had with the marriage was Ronald. She said that he was a bad influence on Jack and Christina and was the one offering drugs to Christina. She had no evidence of this, but believed the night that she went to the apartment, Christina had been drugged. She then went on to say that Christina did have another boyfriend named Eddie, who her family preferred her to be with. So her family did have a problem with Jack despite what Helen had said. Helen said Christina told her that she was afraid of Ronald and Jack. She said that her other sister, Sophie, had bought Christina a bus ticket to go and see Eddie. She then went on to say that Christina never said why she was afraid of them, but did say that she caught Ronald and Jack trying to copy her handwriting. Helen believed that Christina found out that Jack and Ronald were criminals and were getting ready to do something bad, and that's why she wanted to go see Eddie. But why would she go back and get married to Jack? Helen's story didn't make sense, but it did help the prosecution paint Ronald as the bad guy. None of it, however, fit with the actual evidence or testimony from other witnesses. The priest testified and said that Christina was so happy, and he knew that the family didn't want them to get married, but Jack and Christina were both very adamant that they wanted to be together. It's believed Helen made up the part of Ronald and Jack practicing Christina's handwriting to convince the jury that her sister didn't write those letters. However, a handwriting analyst looked over the letters and determined that they were written by Christina. Helen had hoped that her testimony would help the case, but it actually just kind of confused everybody because it didn't match anything else going on in the case. It wasn't until Ronald and Jack testified that things became pretty clear. In Jack's statement to the police after the fire, he told them that during his relationship with Christina, he was also sleeping with Ronald. He said that they had been lovers for many years. During his official testimony, when asked about this relationship with Ronald, Jack tried to say that he was pressured into saying that. But it could also be that he didn't want to admit it in front of a courtroom, because it was confirmed by Ronald that they were lovers, so he couldn't really take it back. But you have to remember that this is the 40s, and being an open gay man was not really an option they had. When Ronald testified, he tried to also change his story, saying yes, that they had slept together a few times, but it was a long time ago, which explained more about why Ronald was always around and why he was trying to protect Jack from whatever Christina was involved in. June 25th, the inquest came to an end, and the jury came back saying that they didn't believe Christina was murdered, but they did kind of find her death suspicious. Christina's death to this day still has unanswered questions, but has not been looked into more due to lack of evidence or suspects. Her notes that had been looked over by psychologists led investigators to strongly believe that Christina was capable of taking her own life. Ronald's strange behavior was understood more later, realizing that, like I said, he was gay and it was the 40s and he was hiding who he was from everyone. 3 years after Christina's death, Jack remarried and he had a son. They divorced in 1969 and he never remarried. When he passed away, he had left everything to Ronald, even though they hadn't seen each other in many years. Ronald ended up moving to New York years after, and he had left his dog with Jack's son. And that's where this story ends. Thank you all for joining me today. Remember to stay safe out there, and I will be talking to you next week.